What a crazy weekend of football we just got. And I can tell you this right now, the waiver wire is going to be popping this week in fantasy football, because ahead of week 2, there's a lot of important players to at the very least consider grabbing off your waiver wire this week. Just make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 2 fantasy football now. Now, I want to talk about our wide receivers first, because I think the wide receivers on the wire are more important this week than the running backs. Now, I'm going to start out with actually Hollywood Brown, and a lot of people will want to know about Quentin Johnston. We'll get to him in just a little bit, because Hollywood Brown, to me, is the first guy that we need to consider on the waiver wire for a couple different reasons. So first of all, he's about 50% rostered in ESPN leagues. 50-50 shot whether this guy's going to be on waivers for you or not, but I would at the very least check it out, because Xavier Worthy apparently separated his shoulder and had a dislocated shoulder in that Friday night game versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, there's no word as of the time of this filming how long exactly Xavier Worthy is going to be missing time. But typically, a dislocated shoulder isn't something that you could just come back from the next week and just be, yeah, I'm good to go. Give me a full target share in the offense, like I'm sure he would have gotten had he not dislocated his shoulder in Friday's game. So in my mind, if you just go over to fsroundup.com right now, and we've got all these beautiful in-depth stats on the website right now for free, just go check it out on the website. You can go to the stats right here, and what you'll see from Hollywood Brown is that he played the most snaps out of any wide receiver and got by far the most amount of targets. 14 targets, 10 receptions, 99 yards on the receiving end for Hollywood Brown. Now, no receiving touchdown, so it wasn't a monstrous fantasy day, but even if he got one touchdown, it would have been a monstrous fantasy day because of the volume that he was able to get from this amount of targets was absolutely insane. So with Hollywood Brown, it's actually without question that this guy is their number one wide receiver without Xavier Worthy, not Juju Smith-Schuster, not anybody else. Now, I'll be honest, Hollywood Brown is not a player that I particularly like. Like, he dropped a lot of balls in that game. Like, there was a lot of ugly drops from Hollywood Brown, but he started to kind of get his groove on as the second half started to really kick in, and the guy was so targeted so high because Travis Kelce can barely move, and Juju Smith-Schuster is not a good wide receiver one. So at the very least, you need to put in a claim on Hollywood Brown this week, because this guy will probably be their starting wide receiver one for the next several weeks at the very least. So this is, to me, an acquire on the wire and sell high in a couple of weeks after he has another good game or two without Xavier Worthy. So yes, I do consider him more of a priority add than I consider Quentin Johnston, who I am not dogging right now. Like, Quentin Johnston, I said this on Thursday night, there was a big revelation that happened in that Los Angeles Chargers that night. What happened is that we saw Quentin Johnston running a full route tree like a true number one wide receiver does in an offense. Last year, we had some fantasy performances from Quentin Johnston that ended up popping off, particularly early in the season, and he became a waiver wire acquisition last year. This year feels a little different because last year it was a lot of scheming to get him open and a lot of deep balls that were heading his way. This year wasn't like that. This year, Quentin Johnston was getting out routes. He was getting little intermediate routes. This was a dominant performance, flat out end of story from Quentin Johnston. And it actually should have been much, much bigger than it turned out to be. He dropped a touchdown pass in full Quentin Johnston form. Like, it was completely Quentin Johnston. So instead of 2 touchdowns, he should have had 3 for a humongous fantasy day that would have netted him 30 plus points in a full PPR format. But nonetheless, he got 7 targets and actually played the second most amount of snaps in this offense behind Ladd McConkey at 53 compared to Ladd's 55. So basically, in 2 wide receiver sets, it was Quentin Johnston without question in this offense right here. So 2 touchdowns should have been 3. 7 targets per game is a really, that's a number that you can execute on for weekly fantasy production right here. Now, I will say, if Keenan Allen were not 70+% rostered in ESPN leagues, he would be a guy that you would want as well, because he got 10 targets in this game. But he's not on the wire. Quentin Johnston is 3.6% rostered in fantasy football leagues right now. So this is a guy that you definitely need to put a waiver claim in on because, again, what we saw with the Chargers offense was a revelation. We have not seen the Los Angeles Chargers put that much responsibility into the hands of their quarterback under Jim Harbaugh and under Greg Roman. This looks like it could be a passing dominant team in 2025 with Los Angeles. And if that is the case, Justin Herbert is a quarterback that you want wide receivers attached to in fantasy football. So yes, he is my second favorite pickup of the week. Now, my third favorite wide receiver pickup of the week is still going to be Dante Thornton. And if you recall, if you were here last week, I said go pick him up before week 1 starts. Because Dante Thornton, what we were about to see was, even before the Amari Cooper news, I said this. This is going to be their wide receiver 2, maybe target number 3 in this offense, not Amari Cooper. Then, of course, during the week, Amari Cooper ends up going and telling the Raiders that he wanted to retire. So now it's not a question that Dante Thornton Jr. is their wide receiver 3. If you look at the snap total here, Jacoby Myers obviously played basically every snap. Trey Tucker was in on wide receiver 2 sets, which is something to monitor. But I don't find it particularly as important, and I'll tell you why. Because Dante Thornton had 38 snaps in that game compared to Jack Betch's 4. So at the very least, number 1, we have learned and been confirmed that Dante Thornton is the preferred wide receiver rookie in this depth chart over Jack Betch. So he's above already the higher priced rookie in this offense. Number 2, Trey Tucker is more of a deep threat / gadget player in this Las Vegas offense. In other words, not really going to be a volume guy for this team. While Tucker played 57 snaps compared to Dante Thornton's 38, he got 3 targets compared to Dante Thornton's 4 targets. This is a trend I would expect to see continue to go up for Dante Thornton and maybe go down for Trey Tucker to where he's only in on 3 wide receiver sets as a slot type of player. And to top it all off, because it only matters to get a target number 3 on an offense, which he realistically is behind Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, it only matters if the quarterback is good. And I can guarantee you that Geno Smith will continue to provide upside for his pass catchers. He had a really good day on the road versus a New England Mike Vrabel defense, throwing for 362 total yards. So this is an offense, ironically, that you do want pass catchers attached to. And Dante Thornton's roster percentage did go up. 15% roster compared to last week, he was at like 3%. So people are catching on to this. He will be a tougher grab this week, but it is absolutely going to be worth doing. Now, the next wide receiver I want to talk about is Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots. Now, I will tell you this. This one feels like a long time coming on here because back in 2023, when he came out of college, I actually really liked Kayshon Boutte as a wide receiver prospect. Now, he dropped in the draft potentially for personal reasons, character reasons, but the bottom line is this guy has stuck on New England's roster because they know the talent is there. And I'll tell you this, we saw it come to fruition for the New England Patriots on Sunday versus the Los Angeles Raiders. You would have thought, right? Stephon Diggs would have led the team in snap count percentage. Even Demario Douglas would have been the second or maybe highest amount of snaps in that offense. Kayshon Boutte played 58 snaps compared to Stephon Diggs at 40 and Demario Douglas at 45. He was the wide receiver 1 in this offense just on snaps alone. And then on targets alone, 8 targets for Kayshon Boutte compared to 7 for Stephon Diggs and 5 for Demario Douglas. Now, Douglas was the one who got in the end zone on basically a 1-yard catch because he ended up with -2 yards on the day. Stephon Diggs had 6 catches for 57, and Kayshon Boutte was getting downfield routes. 6 catches for 103 yards on 8 targets. I'm telling you this right now. Kayshon Boutte is not an out-of-nowhere player, guys. You may think that this one has very little impact moving forward because of Diggs, because of Demario Douglas, because of Kyle Williams maybe taking a step. Kyle Williams, the rookie, played 7 snaps in this game compared to Kayshon Boutte. Again, this is a guy who has been a long time coming. He shouldn't have dropped to the 6th round of the NFL draft in 2023 at the time. He was a better prospect than that. So maybe he's gotten past character issues, and this team with Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels as the OC maybe just flat out trusts him more, because it sure looks like they did trust him a lot more. And this guy is 0.5% rostered. Now, the good thing about Keyshawn is that actually, I think he's going to be overshadowed this week by Hollywood Brown, by Quentin Johnson, even by Dante Thornton, and maybe some other guys that we're going to go through here in a minute as well. But he is a guy that you should at the very least consider dropping some fab on if you're in a fab league, or consider a waiver priority pickup on, because I'm telling you right now, this is not a guy who's going to just go away in this offense based on his usage last week. It's too important to the offense. Now, the next wide receiver is Cedric Tillman. And Cedric Tillman, I will be honest with you guys here, didn't think that he was much of a pickup last week. Like, I didn't really have my eye on him, mostly because I just assumed that the Cleveland wide receiver 2 situation was not going to be ideal for this offense. Because with Joe Flacco, obviously I know that he can sling the pill around, but I just kind of figured that with time, he will become their backup quarterback after they're not winning games. And I still think that's on the table. But I will tell you this, he was on the field every bit as much as Jerry Jeudy. Both of them had 67 snaps in that game, and both of them also had 8 targets. Now, Cedric Tillman had 5 catches for 52 yards and the touchdown right here. So he was used just as much as Jerry Jeudy was. So maybe Jeudy is not the clear wide receiver 1 in Joe Flacco's eyes. And given that Cedric Tillman has a roster percentage of 42.6, that would indicate to me that people already had their eye on him. Now, again, to me, I would prefer Kayshon Boutte, honestly, over Cedric Tillman on the wire this week, because I believe in the quarterback more over in New England and the development of the quarterback more. Joe Flacco, we know what he is, and we don't know how long he's going to last as a starting quarterback. But again, this is a guy I could see easily getting picked up over Kayshon Boutte this week on the wire. So if you really do want him, you're going to have to really put some significant priority on getting Cedric Tillman this week. At number 6, I've got Juju Smith-Schuster at the wide receiver position. And listen, this one's gross. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. I don't want to pick up Juju Smith-Schuster. Like, I think he doesn't have much value on any of my fantasy teams, and I'm in some deep, deep leagues. But Juju Smith-Schuster, you can't ignore what happened. Because, again, if we're assuming that Xavier Worthy is going to miss time, Juju will be involved in this offense. He had 49 snaps and 5 targets and 5 catches for 55 yards on those 5 targets. So at the very least, he will be their number 2 target on this offense. Bottom line, a Kansas City offense with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, it's going to be an offense that you want a wide receiver from in fantasy football. So I get it. This one is gross, but I'm telling you, if you're desperate for a flex option that literally is viable on a week-to-week basis without Worthy, without Rashee Rice, Juju Smith-Schuster should be a guy that you consider at 1% rostered in ESPN leagues. And again, a guy that probably won't go with a priority ad, and someone that you could use our automatic waiver wire tool to pick up after the waivers run at 3 a.m. Because the last thing you want to end up doing is looking like a guy like this.
This is Ted. Look at him. Ted desperately needs to pick up a new running back, or his fantasy team is toast. For the 3rd year in a row. And losing his season again means one thing.
Oh, no.
Don't be Ted. Use Fantasy Football Roundup to automate your waiver pickups and rest easy this season. Huh. Look at him.
Now, the next wide receiver I want to go over is going to be Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. Now, this one deserves some context here because I had, and I would imagine most had, much higher expectations for this Denver offense, and Bo Nix in particular needs to be singled out in 2025. Bo Nix was trash. Like, he was not good at all versus the Tennessee defense. Now, maybe Tennessee's defense is better than I gave them credit for. I know they have talent in Tennessee. Bo Nix had 1 passing touchdown, 2 interceptions, 175 yards on 25 completions out of 40 pass attempts. Like, he was not particularly great in this game. But my thing has always been, I think you're going to want a second pass-catching option in Denver's offense behind Courtland Sutton. And a lot of people automatically threw Evan Ingram into that category, right? Like, he's going to be the number 2 target. I would agree with that statement. But Evan Ingram went down early in that game, and I don't know how much time he's going to miss with that lower body injury. He had 4 targets for 3 catches and 21 yards on 26 total snaps. I alluded to this last week, that you are going to want either Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims Jr., or Pat Bryant out of this offense as that wide receiver 2. So what we got here is some evidence to suggest that Troy Franklin is the guy that you want. So out of all those 3 wide receivers here, Troy Franklin had 45 snaps, Marvin Mims had 40, and Pat Bryant had 4. So Pat Bryant, just based on snap total, is already out of the equation. So now it comes down to Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims Jr. Marvin Mims had 4 targets compared to Troy Franklin's 6. And Marvin Mims had 3 catches for 12 yards compared to Troy Franklin's 4 for 45. So in other words, basically, Marvin Mims is getting short distance targets a lot like he always has. And Troy Franklin is being used as more of a downfield, in the middle of the field wide receiver in this offense. I believe that Bo Nix will get it together, and it's still going to be an offense that you want a wide receiver attached to. And Troy Franklin is not very rostered still, 1.7% rostered. Again, off of a bad Bo Nix week, you may not even have to pay up big for Troy Franklin. So I do think that you could get this guy just in the middle of the week using our waiver wire tool to do it automatically before anybody else does, and catches on that Bo Nix will be better come week 2. The 8th wide receiver I want is Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. Now, let's be honest with Romeo Doubs, right? The Green Bay offense, and I said this going into the week because a lot of people wanted to play Matthew Golden, and I kept trying to stray people away from doing that. This offense is so unpredictable when it comes to wide receivers, and that's why I said bench Matthew Golden this week. And it would have been the smart move because Golden only had 2 targets for 2 catches and 16 yards on 23 snaps. Romeo Doubs outsnapped him. Jaden Reed played less. Dontavian Wicks played 1 snap less than Matthew Golden. And while Jaden Reed led the team in targets while he was on the field with 5, Romeo Doubs had 4 compared to Matthew Golden's 2. Now, again, I don't think that this is going to be something that is consistent and going to be stable, but if you do need a flex play in week 2, if you've got Xavier Worthy down, if you've got somebody else that went down, I think Romeo Doubs could be a guy in a deeper league that could be worthwhile to get. The 9th guy, I will say I'm maybe a little more excited on, it's Elic Ayomaner of the Tennessee Titans. This offense, I will say, looked every bit as bad as I expected against the Denver defense. That's why I was telling you not to play Ridley, not to play anybody in this offense besides Tony Pollard, because they looked really bad as an offense. But I will say, going to Denver, and I said this all last week, was the toughest opening matchup of the week, especially for a rookie quarterback. But we gathered important information in that game. Elic Ayomaner played the 2nd most amount of snaps over Tyler Lockett in this Tennessee offense at 45 behind Calvin Ridley's 54. And while Calvin had 8 targets, 4 catches, and 27 yards versus Pat Surtain, Elic Ayomaner had 7 targets for 2 catches and 13 yards. So, yes, Cam Ward was bad in this game. That was always going to happen. Newsflash. This is an offense that I could easily see being a legit offense to have another wide receiver in if Elic Ayomaner is going to be the consistent number 2 and Calvin will consistently draw the opposing defense's number 1 corner. Because if Cam Ward increases his play week by week against easier defenses over the season, this will become a worthwhile pickup. So at the very least, have your eye on Elic Ayomaner, the rookie wide receiver in Tennessee. He's 4.6% rostered on ESPN. I'm not telling you to jump the gun today and pick him up because I think there's better ads. But I will at the very least say keep your eye on Elic Ayomaner. And the last guy to keep your eye on at the very least is Calvin Austin out of Pittsburgh. Now, I will tell you this as a Steelers fan. I had much more joy than I can remember since Big Ben watching this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. They were awesome to watch. It is so refreshing to have an actual functional NFL quarterback manning the team in Pittsburgh. We haven't seen it since Big Ben. Aaron Rodgers, therefore, makes a wide receiver 2 on the team viable in this offense. While DK Metcalf was the focal point in this offense, and he was the most effective wide receiver, Calvin Austin was on the field almost as much, 45 snaps compared to DK's 54, and he outplayed him from a fantasy perspective. He had 4 catches for 70 yards, 1 touchdown on 6 targets compared to DK's 7 targets. So this is a guy that he will use moving forward. And if we get that play out of Aaron Rodgers, we now have a viable second option in this Pittsburgh passing offense. Something I never thought I would be able to say after Big Ben, because I'm so used to this offense looking like trash. They can pass the ball, they can't run. So I guarantee you a wide receiver 2 in this offense is going to be valuable in fantasy. Now, I want to go through the running backs really quick because I think there's only a couple real worthwhile pickups. 2 of them are out of Cleveland's backfield, Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. Now, Quinshon Judkins is 55.6% rostered in fantasy football right now. He got dropped quite a bit leading up to last week, but he did have a couple things happen. Number one, he signed his contract with the Cleveland Browns, fully guaranteed. It's hilarious how Cleveland loves to dish out guaranteed money to guys with these kind of issues. But the bottom line is he could very well be on the field within the next couple weeks if the NFL doesn't pose a suspension. But that is the big shoe to drop, is that even though the charges were dropped formally, he could easily still see a suspension from the league. See Ezekiel Elliott a couple years ago when he didn't have formal charges against him, but he still got suspended. So it would not shock me whatsoever if the NFL did suspend Quinshon Judkins. That's why I consider Dylan Sampson the better pickup right now in fantasy football. Dylan Sampson, if you come to fsroundup.com and look at the RB usage, what is really cool about this is we break it down to you really digestible. It's in circle graph format, and you can hover your mouse over the chart right here and see the plays and all the breakdowns of the running backs on every single team. Jerome Ford played 40 snaps while Dylan Sampson played 33. Now, Dylan Sampson outplayed Jerome Ford on early downs. He outplayed him in short yardage. And basically, Jerome Ford, what he really made his money on was goal line work and third downs and in the 2-minute drill. But Dylan Sampson got a lot of pass catching usage. Dylan Sampson got 8 targets, 8 receptions for 65 yards. So Joe Flacco, we know, is going to continue to check it down. And if he's going to dominate that market share, he alone will give you flex-worthy upside moving forward in this offense. Because it's not like Jerome Ford was a world beater on the ground. He was awful. Jerome Ford was 0.7 yards per carry. It was gross. While Dylan Sampson didn't do much better at 2.9 rushing yards per carry, it still is better. And I can see them moving more towards Dylan Sampson in the future. So I definitely think that he is a worthwhile pickup. And I will add this as well. If Trey Benson is on your waiver wire, you need to scoop him up like that. Trey Benson is 51.4% rostered on ESPN leagues. I said this, and I tried to tell people this not only last week, all offseason. I overranked Trey Benson in my rankings to prove a point, and actually I was right. Trey Benson last week versus the New Orleans Saints had 8 carries compared to James Conner's 12. So that's not that big of a difference right here. James Conner had 39 rushing yards on those 12 carries for 3.9 yards per tote. Trey Benson had 69 yards on 8 carries for 6.9 yards per carry. So yeah, the narrative that Trey Benson isn't good is wrong. It's flat out wrong at this point. And if you do go to the RB usage of Arizona running backs, like James Conner was there on he basically beat Trey Benson everywhere, except for third downs. Trey Benson was the third down back in this offense. 10 plays for Trey Benson on third downs compared to James Conner's 3. But I can guarantee you this all plays number for James Conner being at 43 plays, that's going to dip in favor of Trey Benson if he continues to play like this. This is a trend. I said it before the season even started. One of 2 things will happen, but they both lead to the same result. Either one, Trey Benson is going to take advantage of an injured James Conner, which I think is still very much on the table, considering the injury history and the age. Or number 2, Trey Benson would flat out outperform James Conner, and it looks like that may happen sooner than later. So one way or the other, it will lead to the same thing. Trey Benson will become this team's running back 1. He has no business being on your waiver wire right now.